Hey everyone, it's Wingspan TT, the fourth best commentator on YouTube, and Chance Ravine, in-game CEO of Wingspan Delivery Services. And today I'm going to be talking about how to fit a Hound or Purifier for solo PvP, and generally speaking, solo ganking, let's be honest here. Last time I did a video that was about how to fit a Manticore or a Nemesis for the same thing, but I want to do these separately because these ships are different. Whereas the Manticore and the Nemesis have 4 mid slots and 2 low slots. The Purifier and the Hound have 3 of each, 3 mids and 3 lows. They all have, of course, 5 highs. And you wouldn't think it makes a big difference. In some ways, it's not a large difference. You're still going to play generally the same, but there are some fits that work a little better on the 3 slots, some that work better on the 4 slots, and some other minor differences between the hulls. For instance, the Purifier and the Hound are faster and more agile than the Manticore and the Nemesis, whereas the Manticore and Nemesis, in general have a longer targeting range, and they have their own advantages. So there are trade-offs, and I'm going to show two or three fits today to just go through some options for, again, going out solo, especially in wormhole space or into, lowsec and wormhole space, which is primarily where I operate when I'm doing my torpedo deliveries. Okay, so let's take a look at this. The Hound is the fastest of the stealth bombers. I generally prefer the Hound over the Purifier for aesthetic reasons, for speed reasons. You fly around cloaked a lot of the time in a stealth bomber, so just being able to go faster, slow boating without a prop mod makes a world of difference. It's just that much less time that you're spending, getting into position on your target and navigating around. But let's look at the basic fit here. And again, there's going to be some leeway in here because while I have very good fitting skills, because I've spent a year basically training specifically into stealth bombers and things like that, there's some leeway here. So if you want to use different meta items or you want to swap something out, I'll give you some examples. So in the high slots, you always want to have 3 torpedo launchers, and in most cases you want to have the Arbalest torpedo launchers, which are the metaphor versions. And now, of course, if you watch this video and it's years old, things might have changed. But basically what I'm saying is you need to have 3 torpedo launchers in your highs. You're going to have the Caldera Navy torpedoes for the most part in here, and this is the Tech 1 version with the Tech 1 launchers. If you want to do Tech 2s or polarized or anything like that, that's totally separate. We'll look at something like that in a minute, but right now it's 3. And I fork them 1, 3, and 5 in the slot. That way when you overheat them, they don't overheat each other as much. They overheat the modules in the middle, so they don't burn out as fast. So you can apply overheated damage for a longer period of time without burning out your torpedoes. Here, of course, you have the Covert Ops cloaking device. This is pretty much the only one, unless you're going to fit the smokescreen cloaking device, which is the blingy version. Smokescreen definitely has uses on some ships. I would not recommend it for a stealth bomber because its primary benefit of the smokescreen is CPU, and it locks. It allows you to lock faster, but cloak bombers don't have a lock delay anyway, and the CPU, they have a bonus to CPU when it comes to cloaks anyway, so there's really no purpose to fit that. You should usually fit this one. And here I have a core probe launcher 2. Again, this is definitely one of the most variable spots as far as CPU goes. If you're having trouble fitting anything, I would put this last, and then you have some options here. You can fit the core probe launcher 2 if you have the skills and the space for it. You can fit the core probe launcher 1 if you have less CPU or don't have the skills. You can fit the Sisters core probe launcher, which is about 30 to 40 million ISK depending where you're buying it, and has even less CPU. Or you can go with any of these probe launchers and simply offline it when you're not using it in space. So when you're out in space, you would have this offline, and then when you need to scan, you would go out to a safe spot, you would uncloak, you do something like turn off your warp disruptor and then turn on your probe launcher, you do your scanning, and then then do the opposite. So if you really are low on CPU, that is an option. Of course, you get CPU implants, and there's other things for that. We'll talk about that in a second. So these are pretty much spoken for. You don't have a lot of variety up here unless you're going for some strange fit with a gun, or you're going with bombs. And in general, I don't do bomb fits, but really what you would do is just swapping this out for a bomb launcher and then swapping in a CPU mod if you didn't have enough CPU. That's all. That's the only change. So there's really not much to say about it. Over here we have an afterburner, and in general I do like micro warp drives on my stealth bombers, but because the Purifier and Hound are relatively fast, I don't feel like you really need the afterburner, the micro warp drive as much. And it's more taxing on your CPU. But anyway, my afterburner about 1 kilometer a second here. and then that'll mean like 1500 meters a second overheated. Definitely enough speed, and because the Hound is so agile, you can get in a really tight orbit, just leave the afterburner on, leave it on overheated, whatever. If you want to throw in a Corelli or X-type or C-type or whatever, any of those things on here to get it more blingy, you could definitely do that. To go even faster, it's totally within the realm of possibility. Here we have a target painter. This increases the damage of your torpedoes against smaller targets, enough said. And a warp disruptor. And here's what's good. Here's what's good about the 3-slot bombers. So the 3 mid-slot bombers, while you do miss the one mid-slot here for EWAR, things like that, what that means is in general is that you're not using as much CPU because you don't have a 4th slot to use up additional CPU. Like if I had another target painter here, that'd be 15 CPU. I'd be out of CPU, as you can see. So and then I'd have to swap out a probe launcher or put in a CPU mod or whatever. So you kind of don't have to worry about it. And what it also means is because you have limited electronics here, your cap is going to be relatively stable. So I can run all these for 3 minutes straight. Trust me, there's nothing in a bomber here shooting for 3 minutes straight that either it won't die itself or you won't die. Either way. So in general, in a stealth bomber, if you haven't done the job in 30 seconds or so, maybe a minute, you're either dead or you're never going to kill the target. So just keep that in mind. And because you have the spare CPU, like I fit this warp disruptor 2 here for the range. But if you want to fit the warp, a faint warp disruptor, one of the meta ones with the lower range, it's totally fine. You'll save some CPU. If you want to put on a blingy pirate one for even more CPU savings or more range, that's totally fine too. But again, this is a very basic build that is not particularly expensive. This whole thing will probably cost 30, maybe 40 million-ish, depending where you're buying it. Let's look at the lows here. We have 2 ballistic control systems to increase damage, and you can see with them off, my base damage would be 338. Now I do have implants and pretty good torpedo skills, but with both of them on, you'll see it goes up to 497 cold. So this would be just shy of 600 DPS overheated, which is very good. Definitely more than enough than is necessary. And in general, I would say once you're doing 400 DPS, whether it's hot or cold, you'll be doing, being in a good range to hit most of the targets you'll be able to hit. So being at 500, 600 is very safe. And then what I did with the 3rd slot down here is I put in a nanofiber internal structure, so I have even more speed and agility. And we see here, my base speed here is 425 meters a second, essentially. Without the nanofiber, 387. So it's definitely a big difference. That's like a, that's like a more than 10% increase in speed, which is going to be a very big deal when you're orbiting the target, when you're moving in a position, when you're just burning around systems and moving around everywhere. It's a big deal. And you could take an overdrive injector, but I take the nanofibers because I just really like to have the agility as well, the agility bonus that comes from them. And you lose some structure hit points, but the reality is if you're taking structural damage as stealth bomber, you're pretty much going to die anyway. So that's a moot point. Now here's where I'm going to say there's some flexibility in this build, right? And this is what's great with the 3-slot, low-slot bombers. Let's say, for instance, that you had really terrible fitting skills. And you were at negative 30 CPU here, negative 40 CPU, you could throw a coprocessor in here at the bottom and gain a lot of CPU, and really your build will only be affected, you'll lose a little bit of speed. Or for instance, if you plan to be dueling another bomber, it's kind of stupid, whatever, fine, then you could take this thing out and put a damage control unit, and then you could swap this out for damage control, and all's well in the world. You'll be taking reduced damage from 1800 effective HP. You'd probably go to like 2200 or something like that. So there's flexibility there, which is really great for the 3-slot bombers. In a lot of ways, they're easier to fit because you don't have to worry about as much CPU here in the mids, but they're also easier to fit because there's fewer variables to worry about. You don't have to figure out what you're going to put here, and you also have, you could throw fitting mods in the bottom, and we'll talk about something else related to that in a second. And here in the rig slots, what I've done is I put 2 small warhead rigger catalyst 2s, okay? And if you don't remember from the last video or from my guide or anything like that, and by the way, this is all in my guide to the torpedo delivery handbook that's available at torpedodelivery.com. So if you want to learn a bit more about these builds or in-depth discussion about that, it's all in the guide that you can download for free, but I'm going through in this video for the sake of the illiterate and people who haven't heard of this yet or anything like that. And what these do is reduce the explosion radius of torpedoes. By default, torpedoes have explosion radius of 450 meters, which means that they only do full damage to things that are 450 meters or larger in signature radius. But you'll see here, thanks to these small warhead rigger catalysts, Okay, and also thanks to my skills and implants and things like that, the explosion radius is down to 218 meters. That's half. Basically, that means that the threshold for me to do full damage to target has been halved. And when you combine that with a target painter that's going to increase signature radius by like 40 or 50% overheated, that means that I can apply full damage to things that are maybe 150 to 180 meters signature radius, which could, you know, be like a cruiser or something like that, instead of having to hit a battleship or having to hit a structure or having to hit a large industrial. I can hit, you know, medium-sized mining ships or cruisers or things like that and apply massive more damage. Now, of course, there's still penalties for explosion velocity, but that's a whole nother ballpark. So basically, torpedoes in the highs, the meta torpedoes, cloak, probe launcher, afterburner, target painter, warp disruptor, ballistic controls, and then whatever you want down here, and then rigger cast. And again, if these are too expensive for you, I believe they go for like 4 to 10 million each. You can definitely go with the meta ones, but I highly recommend the twos because, you know, the penalty is not any different, but you get, you know, much more torpedo strength. And this is a very solid basic build where you can just get into orbit around someone at like 15 to 20 km, turn on your disruptor and just pelt them with torpedoes and leave all your mods on and apply damage. Just absolutely solid. Okay, now let's look at a different build, and this is a shield build with a medium shield extender that is very popular for stealth bombers, especially for fleets for, well, if you're going to do bombing runs, you will need a bomb launcher. But this is something that fits much easier on the 3-slot bombers than the 4-slot bombers. And why? Because of the utility slot that's in the lows here, and because of the reduced need for mid-slot CPU. So what you'll see here is what I've done is I've dropped in a medium Regulus shield induction. That's a medium shield extender. Now you could drop in a medium shield extender 2 or whatever, different, you know, meta levels depending on your skills and your fitting capabilities. But what you'll see is that what that's done is my previous hit points was 1800. That's brought up to 3300 hit points. Again, this will depend on your skills and things like that, but generally speaking, this almost doubled my effective hit points. Okay, and in order to fit this, the thing that you got to keep in mind with the shield extenders is the fitting requirements is 22 megawatts of power grid, which is generally not going to be available to you unless you use a power grid modifier. So what I've done in here is dropped a micro auxiliary power core, which you know, takes a little CPU and adds in power grid, and then allows to fit in the medium shield extender. And what this could allow you to do is, now that you have almost double the hit points, if you're fighting a target that, say, has light drones, but isn't some crazy drone boat, or that doesn't have tons of damage, like a lot of mining vessels carry drones, or like a Noctis, or some explorers, or something like that. Like, even an Astero has drones, but it isn't, you know, drone damage bonus, so they're not going to eat you alive instantly. Not that I recommend, you know, fighting an actively combat fit Astero all the time, but anyway, that's not the point. The point is that you can survive a little bit longer against things like that, or if you're in a fleet, again, you can have this up and then, you know, stay on the field longer. You don't have to warp out as soon. The millisecond someone sneezes at you, you won't instantly die. Now, of course, you know, 3,300 hit points still isn't a lot, but it can be the difference between life or death. And I have had the shield fits save me before. It's not all the time. I generally don't recommend shield fits for certain types of wormhole ganking, like if you are going after industrials and epithals and explorers, the reality is that the odds that you're going to need a shield are very low. But if you're going to be targeting, you know, ratting battle cruisers or battleships, or any time that there are, you know, enemies on the field, or the sleeper still on the field or something like that, you might want the hit points, and it comes at a very small cost. Obviously, because I lost the nano, my velocity is lower. I don't have the target painter now, so the damage application is worse. I can't hit, you know, as small things as before. I was also forced to downgrade this to a faint warp disruptor from warp disruptor 2, so I have less range, and I was forced to bring the core probe launcher from a 2 to a 1. Again, this could be a sister's core launcher. You can always compensate with blingy stuff, but, you know, it's up to you. Do you want to fly a 300 million ISK bomber and lose it? That's kind of up to you. And again, you know, you do have options here. You could, for instance, lose a small warhead rigger catalyst, switch this out to an overclocker, then you get more CPU, and then you can bump this back up to 2 and bump this back up to 2 or something like that. You have a lot of options, but I think you could appreciate that this gives a much more survivability on the field. And if there's one thing that the Hound and the Purifier are good for, over the Nemesis and Manticore survivability, because they're faster, they have smaller signature radius, they target faster, They orbit closer, they're more agile, they warp out easier, and they can fit a shield a lot faster. Now you can do this, of course, on a Nemesis or Manticore. You can use a low for the power core and then put in a shield, but what's going to happen is this. Because they only have 2 lows, you're going to be forced to give up a ballistic control, which is going to kill your damage. It's like my damage will drop from 500 to 400 here. That's a huge difference. And you're also going to be strapped for CPU because you're going to be fitting CPU here. It's just going to be rough. It's going to be rough. So typically speaking, I find it a lot easier to fit for solo for solo torpedo delivery. This is easier on a Hound, and this is a very, very flexible and easy fit. But I would not recommend it, of course, until your fitting skills allow it. Alright, so for the last build here, I put together something that's kind of stupid. It is a T2 launcher fit. T2 torpedo launchers here with Nova rage torpedoes. Again, rage torpedoes do more damage, but they have less range, and they hit only large targets, so their explosion radius is even larger. You'll see here with my skills and fit, they're going to go out to 376 meters, which is pretty large. And keep in mind that they started at like 700 something, so I have pretty good skills for this kind of thing. And I also put in 2 Caldera Navy ballistic control systems in the lows, and a ballistic control system 2. So that's 3 ballistic controls in the lows with T2s in the highs. I could even put in, for instance, polarized launchers. I'm not sure exactly what the fitting. There's actually none for sale here in Ren's. The reality though is this is coming out to 729 DPS cold. This would of course be going up to about 900 DPS hot. I'm sure with polarized launchers it would be again in the 1100, 1200 DPS range. And of course you can always go crazier than this. You can switch all this stuff out to better ballistic controls. And you'll see here I was actually forced to offline my faint warp disruptor. So if I was realistically going to go for this fit, which I would never do, because this fit is absolutely stupid, I'd pull one of these. I would do something like throw in a coprocessor down here, right? Like I wouldn't do 2 of these stupid, whatever. Now you go. See now here, okay, look at that. Absolutely reasonable. So now we're doing 600 DPS cold. Again, this would go up to 750 or so hot. It is a market increase. Is it worth it to give up some of your speed and some of the other flexibility? That's kind of up to you. That's up to you. It really depends what you're going to do for the low slot. But I think you see here there's a lot of flexibility with the 3-slot bombers. And of course you can always dump these rigs. These rigs cost, depending on what your rigging level is for launcher riggings, this is going to cost you anywhere between, let's say, 10 and 20 CPU each. So if you got rid of one of these or dropped in an overclocker, you can definitely fix some CPU holes there. But overall, I really like flying the Hound. The Purifier not so much, mainly because it's ugly. But the Purifier and the Hound, very similar fitting overall, very similar play style with how you use them. But really, the bombers are all very similar. I'm sure between this video and the last video, which again, like I said, I'll link, you can see that how you use them and how you fit them is very, very close to one another. If you have any fitting questions, definitely check out my full downloadable guide at torpedodelivery.com, or leave a comment here or anything like that. But this is pretty much all there is to it. This is what I fly all the time. This is how I get out there and get kills, and also how I get killed. Check out my kill board. You can see that it works. I'd like to thank you very much for watching, and I hope you come back next time. Cheers.